Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on April 17, 2026 for Reason to Resist. Today we're pleased to be joined again by Professor Mohammad Marandi. Professor Marandi is an American-born Iranian academic and political analyst after being born and raised in the US. He returned to Iran and volunteered to fight in the Iran-Iraq War back in the 1980s and survived 2 chemical weapons attacks, also was wounded twice in that Western-backed war on Iran. He is now a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Thank you very much for joining us again, Professor Marandi.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure being on your show.
And before we begin, Professor, I just want to remind our viewers to like and share this video if they find it to be informative. And if you haven't already subscribed to Reason to Resist, we warmly encourage you to do so. So, Professor, we learned today that there has been a ceasefire implemented in Lebanon. This was an agreement that was apparently reached between the Israeli regime and the Lebanese government. It was announced by Donald Trump. This morning, predictably, and by the way, it was supposed to come into effect at midnight local time last night, and this morning, predictably, the Lebanese army confirmed that Israel had violated the ceasefire, saying that it had recorded several Israeli attacks overnight, including intermittent shelling of some Lebanese villages. Now, Professor, let's assume that this ceasefire, despite Israel's rich historical record of violating ceasefires, manages to remain in effect for 10 days, as has been agreed. That means that the Lebanese ceasefire would be in effect for 5 more days than the original ceasefire agreement between Iran and US, which by my calculations is supposed to end next week on April 22nd. So I guess my first question to you is, does this portend a prolongation, in your view, of the ceasefire that is currently in effect between Iran and the United States? How do you think these two ceasefires will interact with each other, affect each other?
Well, this ceasefire doesn't really have anything to do with the Lebanese government. And that is something that the Americans and the Israelis and their puppets in power in Beirut would like people to think. This ceasefire was as a result of Iranian pressure, of course, the resistance in Lebanon, and Iranian pressure. As you recall, the ceasefire was between Iran and the United States, included Lebanon. That is what the mediators clearly pointed out. And since the Americans, under pressure from Netanyahu, who was carpet bombing Lebanon to wreck the ceasefire, since Trump backed down and obeyed Netanyahu, Iran did not fulfill its side of the bargain. And that was to let ships, a larger number of ships, pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Ships were passing through, but they were more limited in number. Iran was saying that those that are linked to adversaries, and the 5 countries in the Persian Gulf, Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain, were all adversaries. They were assisting in this onslaught against Iran. Those linked to Iran's adversaries, whether inside the Persian Gulf or beyond, they would not enjoy the benefits of using the Strait of Hormuz. But Iraq, for example, did, or some ships that belonged to the Chinese or other friendly countries, they were able to pass through. In accordance with this ceasefire, Iran was going to allow more ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So now that the ceasefire has been imposed on Netanyahu, and it was supposed to be imposed a day earlier, and he resisted, and then the Iranians added a threat of striking the Israeli regime, and then last night he accepted the ceasefire. So it really has nothing to do with the government in Beirut. The government in Beirut is a puppet-rich government, and they have no cards to play. They are not unwilling to fight the Israeli regime. They're unwilling to protect the sovereignty of Lebanon. So I think it's quite clear that the Netanyahu regime was not impressed by the tea that was offered to them during the meeting between the ambassadors of the Israeli regime and the Lebanese regime, and thus accepted a ceasefire. But so right now, nothing really extraordinary has happened, and no one should be shocked by Trump's tweets. By now, everyone should understand that anything Trump says is probably not true. Or it could be negated in the subsequent tweet. So I've actually stopped listening to Trump's speeches, even when he's talking about our region. I just look at the headlines to see what he said, but I don't waste my time looking. I don't follow him on Twitter or anything like that, or the accounts that are affiliated to him, because it doesn't mean anything. Nothing that he says means anything. It could he lies, he twists the truth, he changes his position all the time. The only thing that matters for Iran are the facts on the ground. So he can say all the dust is going to, the nuclear dust, as he calls it, is going to be handed over. Iran will no longer have a peaceful nuclear program. The Strait of Hormuz is open for good. Fine, he can say that. But the same Trump could launch a war against Iran next week, and Iran is preparing for war.
Yeah.
What has happened is what was supposed to happen 10 days ago. We were supposed to have a ceasefire, and then Iran would carry out certain acts, and the United States would carry out certain acts. Since they did not impose a ceasefire on Lebanon, in Lebanon, the Iranians did not allow those extra ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz. And as the global economy deteriorated further, Trump was under a lot of pressure to put pressure on the Israeli regime. The night before last, his pressure wasn't enough. Iran added the threat of striking Israel. That probably did the trick, alongside the fact that the resistance in Lebanon has been doing an extraordinary job. Remember, Netanyahu wanted to take Bent Jobel, a town that both you and I know. And it was key for him to do so, but he failed. But that doesn't mean this ceasefire will last. That doesn't mean that there won't be war between Iran and the United States. I mean, Iran will not launch any war. Doesn't reverse act of aggression against Iran. What it means is that all that has happened today is that what was supposed to happen 10 days ago is now happening.
So this having happened, the Iranian foreign minister put out a statement today, and it read as follows. In line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, the passage for all commercial vessels through Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of ceasefire. And this language was particularly interesting to me. On the coordinated route, he wrote, as already announced by Ports and Maritime Organization of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I find this, many times we've heard over the past year or so that Donald Trump, who by my estimation is clinically insane, was playing 5D chess. But my own impression is, in fact, the Iranian government is playing 5D chess with the U.S. Regime and the Israeli regime. And this seems to me to be a very interesting example of that. I'm curious to know, for example, what is meant by on the coordinated route as already announced by Ports and Maritime Organization. I mean, we can easily figure out what that means geographically speaking, but does that mean, in your opinion, that any ship wishing to pass is going to have to pay a toll to Iran? Or do you think that that question is left open and nobody really knows outside of the Iranian government what is going to happen to ships passing through the strait?
I think that formally no one outside of the Iranian government is going to know what happened. And I think different ships, depending on who their owners are, will be treated differently. And he's also saying that we control the Strait of Hormuz, and we control the pace in which these ships, which are allowed to freely pass through, and not all ships are allowed, military vessels are not allowed to pass through. without any special permission. But these ships are allowed to pass through, but it may take time. So it's not going to be as if they can just go. They have to go through a specific route. They have to get permission, and they can leave. So the pace in which the ships go through the Strait of Hormuz will depend on many things. The ceasefire, the behavior of the United States. Right now, the United States is imposing an embargo or a blockade on Iranian ports. If that continues, then this can discontinue. If that if it continues, Iran will escalate in the Red Sea. So many things right now can happen that I think we should be prepared for the worst. We should be prepared for a U.S. assault on Iran and a land invasion. And of course, if they carry out a land invasion, which I think is quite possible, they will be able to take a few islands and some territory, I'm sure, because Iran is not going to fight to hold every inch of territory. Iran is going to fight like like a chess master. It is going to play. It is going to fight in a way in which the enemy suffers. So once the U.S. is in, it will be stuck, and Iran will use the time and territory to its advantage. So if the United States carries out an assault, Western media, even those opposed to Trump, will be talking about how heroic the Americans are and what a fantastic job they're doing, just as we saw at the beginning of the Ramadan War, the 40-day war, just as we saw at the beginning of the 12-day war. But ultimately, neither of those wars turned out well. And if the Americans carry out an assault on Iran, I have no doubt that it will not end well for the Americans. The very fact that Iran has done so well with its missiles and drones and air defenses and its navy, which is under in underground tunnels alongside the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, just as they've performed very well so far, you can be sure that the Iranians have been preparing themselves for a land invasion by the United States for decades too. And so this is not going to end well for the United States if they attack. But right now we are where we are. We are just implementing what was supposed to be implemented 10 days ago, but the way in which it's implemented by the Iranians will depend on the behavior of the United States.
And the other aspect of this statement which caught my eye was he was quite clear in saying that it's completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire, which is a few days. And you've indicated there are a number of uncertainties. Of course, one of those uncertainties is what is the American side going to do with its so-called blockade? And how is that going to impact the behavior of shipping companies? The fact that this blockade has been declared. I would imagine, as a technical matter now, nobody can say that Iran isn't complying with its side of the deal. As soon as the Lebanon ceasefire was declared, it announced that this strait was open. But within the space of a few days, I can't imagine that much is going to change because there's a lot of uncertainty on the ground. Shipping companies are going to go back and they're going to consult with their insurers. There's going to be a lot of debate about what all of this means. And as a practical matter, I doubt very much that this opening of the Strait of Hormuz for the remainder of this ceasefire between Iran and the United States is going to have any meaningful impact on the overall supply of oil and gas in the world today. And that really is the critical question. So this is why I think this is really a sort of a masterful chess move, because it is compliance with their end of the bargain. But given how everything is played out, it's not likely to decrease pressure significantly on.
Well, let me correct that a bit. You're right, but it didn't have to be this way.
Yes.
If the Americans if Netanyahu had not destroyed the ceasefire and carried out that mass assault on Lebanese citizens, which Western media lied and tried to portray it as an attack on Hezbollah, which it wasn't. And those Western journalists in Beirut lied through their teeth. And I spoke to two of them. because two of them on different occasions during the past few days contacted me to get a sound bite or a small interview. And I said, why are you saying these are strongholds and Hezbollah targets? And they said, we didn't do that. We sent that to our editors, and that's not an excuse. Your name is on it. You are justifying the slaughter of innocents by allowing a lie to be made in your name. So Western journalists in Beirut have been lying through their teeth and assisting genocide. So they're complicit in genocide. History will remember that. More importantly, God will deal with that one day. But so they're no different from Netanyahu in that respect. But it didn't have to be this way. If Netanyahu had obeyed the ceasefire, the ships would have been allowed to pass through 10 days ago. So the intensification of the global crisis over the last few days is on Netanyahu. And right now, the Iranians are basically doing what they were willing to do 10 days ago. Iran was prepared to do that 10 days ago. And so the Americans have shot themselves in the foot. Now, if the Americans now want to add a new problem to the equation, blockading Iranian ports, fine. But then Iran will then go, the Iranians will shut down the Red Sea, as they said they would. And the free shipping, the ships that can go freely from the Strait of Hormuz, then they will be under, there will be more bureaucratic hurdles for them to go through before they pass through. Mm-hmm. So it's all up to the United States. Now, again, some people are saying that something big has happened. Nothing big has happened. This is what was supposed to happen a long time ago, and it didn't, thanks to Netanyahu. Just like Netanyahu wrecked the negotiations in Pakistan, and it was clear that Vance did not have authority because he kept making phone calls, unlike the Iranians. And one of those people was Netanyahu, who he himself said that Vance called me and he would give me a report. The vice president of the United States gives reports to some puny colony in the Mediterranean. And then he says, just like other senior U.S. officials do every day. So obviously the president of the United States is not Donald Trump, it's Netanyahu, from what Netanyahu says. But in any case, just like he wrecked the negotiations, just like he wrecked the ceasefire, tomorrow he could wreck everything, and we could have another war. So the ceasefire in Lebanon is not stable. The ceasefire between Iran and the United States is not stable. Why? Because Netanyahu is a genocidal maniac, and because Trump is a psychopath who is unstable.
Yeah. And for our viewers, if anybody has any doubts about what the Israeli regime was striking in Lebanon during the ceasefire, just watch our reports from Beirut over the past, and from Saida and Nabatea, and you'll see for yourselves that these were not in any way, shape, or form military targets.
No, they were targeting civilians. They targeted medics. Yeah. They targeted hospitals. They targeted schools. I mean, in the war against Iran, the Israelis bombed a synagogue in Tehran. They completely destroyed a synagogue. They're enemies of Jews. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they're non-Zionist Jews.
Yeah.
This is the truth of the Israeli regime. It's what they have been doing to Lebanon is the same as what they were doing to Gaza. No difference. Absolutely no difference. The only difference is that Hezbollah is a very effective fighting force, and also the world is sick and tired of Netanyahu and Trump.
So I would like now to turn to Islamabad. You were actually there and had an insider's view. And of course, in advance of the meeting in Islamabad, Trump put out this now infamous or famous post in which he said that the Iranian 10-point peace plan was a workable basis of negotiation, then seemed to disavow it or at least raise questions about what was actually in it. And I just want to make sure, I want to put a finer point on this so we all understand, Professor Marandi, what was in the 10-point peace plan. This is a post that was issued by the Iranian embassy in India uh, on the 8th of April. So I'm quickly going to summarize what it says. The 10-point conditions that the U.S. has accepted as workable: non-aggression, continuation of Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, acceptance of enrichment, lifting all primary sanctions, lifting all secondary sanctions, termination of all UN Security Council resolutions, termination of all IAEA Board of Governors resolutions, payment of compensation to Iran, withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, and finally, cessation of war on all fronts, including against the heroic Islamic resistance of Lebanon. So just to be clear, Professor Marandi, is it your understanding that this is the 10-point peace plan that Iran put on the table and that Donald Trump was referencing?
Oh, yes, this is the only peace plan that Iran put on the table, and Trump accepted it as the framework. And it's quite reasonable if you want normalization. That's how you do it. But for the empire, even something reasonable is outrageous because they are used to looking at the rest of the world as inferiors and as the he accepted
Right.
that, and I think that is huge. It doesn't matter if he's going to stonewall and prevent we have to take into account. On day one, he said that the Iranians must accept unconditional surrender. And then he evolved his position until he wrote that 15-point plan, which was a violation of Iran's sovereignty, rejected by Iran, and then he accepted this as the framework for negotiations.
Okay.
That was
So
symbolic of U.S. defeat in the war.
it was stunning, as a matter of fact. I was astonished that he actually put this in writing, because this was what you have up on the screen here is what my understanding of the 10-point peace plan was. So my next question to you is: you were there, and I understand you may be limited in what you can say, but once the parties convened, did J.D. Vance or any other representative of the U.S. delegation accept any of these 10 conditions? And if so, which ones?
Well, first of all, I was not in the negotiating room. And in general, I try to steer clear of anything that is secret or classified in general. I've always tried. Now and every now and then I may hear something from someone, but I stay clear of these things because I deal with the media. I deal with, I don't want to know stuff that is not necessary for me to know. So a lot of things were discussed. On the way there, the Iranians were skeptical. That I could tell from my conversations with both members of the delegation and people who accompanied the negotiators. Both members of both the negotiators and the broader delegation. There was a lot of skepticism. And during the entire day, as they spoke, there was some progress on different issues, but on key issues, the United States near the end of the day became more uncompromising or unable to cooperate. And the Iranians believe that it was because of the phone conversations and that Vance really had no authority. And of course, the next day they were supposed to continue, and suddenly Vance walked off. He walked away. So it was clear that this was not a serious act of negotiations. And also we had the Washington Post put up an opinion piece while we were either on our way there or we'd reached there, I don't remember, where they said that the United States should assassinate and murder the negotiators. So on our way back, we were expecting, we believed that there was a high possibility that our plane would be shot down. And to the credit of all the men and women who went to Islamabad, every single one of them, as far as I know, came back with us. No one said, I want to stay back or I want to stay a few days here. They all came back. So they were waiting to be killed. The plane, of course, did not come to Tehran. As soon they changed course without telling anyone. As soon as they entered Iranian airspace, they went and landed in Mashhad, which is near the Afghanistan and Turkmenistan border. And then we went to Tehran by land. I went by train personally, which is, I think, I don't know, maybe near 1,000 kilometers distance, but I don't know the exact distance. But it's a. I took the. I was on the. I slept that night on the train on the way back. So, but the point is that there was no one to negotiate with, and it's clear that just like it was Netanyahu who prevented the ceasefire from being implemented in Lebanon, and preventing the ceasefire from being implemented in general, and allowing those ships to leave the pass through the Strait of Hormuz, thanks to him, it was also Netanyahu and his people who were blocking any progress in Islamabad.
So all of this raises the question of whether or not this infamous post by Trump about accepting the 10-point peace plan as a workable basis of negotiation contained an iota of truth in it. And my own view, which I'm sensing you probably espouse yourself, is that it was a lie, and that the Trump regime never actually accepted the 10-point peace plan. And for whatever reason, whatever its motivation may have been, or his motivation be, who knows what goes on in that head of his, he put that out there in order to induce the Iranian government to sit down at the table, which is something they were very reluctant to do. And there were plenty of reports, including the Western media, that they were rebuffing overtures from the American side for negotiations. But then this dramatic statement came, really, which astonished a lot of us, because we saw this acceptance of that plan would have constituted an absolute humiliating defeat for the United States and Israel. And my own view is that Trump has a political problem. The political problem is that he has told his base that he is going to seek peace. He never had any intention of doing that. And so he's constantly trying to project himself as a person who's trying really hard to bring an end to the wars that he either prolongs or instigates. He's done this in the case of Ukraine. He did it in the case of Gaza. He puts on this big theater about being the person of peace, while underneath, or in actual fact, you look at his actions, he's instigating wars, he's prolonging wars, he's escalating wars. So it's all just, at the end of the day, kabuki theater. And now, supporting this interpretation, and I'd like you to feel free to comment on your own, with you part company or not with my interpretation of his behavior. I wanted to show you this statement or article from the Jerusalem Post about recent commentary from the head of the Mossad, David Bernea. And after the ceasefire came into effect, Bernea, an unrepentant war criminal, said that the Iran mission of the Mossad is incomplete and will be incomplete until it results in regime change in Iran. Now, he did also clarify, for what it's worth, that he didn't think that the completion of this mission is going to occur during the current war, but it's going to occur somewhere down the road after this war is complete, whenever that may be. And separately from all of this, you had an unusual statement from the Russian Security Council that there is a massive U.S. military buildup going on in West Asia, and that the negotiations are quite possibly a cover for the United States to launch, and Israel, to launch a further round of aggression against the Islamic Republic. So I guess let's take this. I've given you a lot of information. Let's start first of all with Bernea's statement. What do you make of this, and what it portends for future relations between Iran and the United States?
Well, is anyone surprised? I mean, that's been the objective for 47 years now. And that's been the objective towards the resistance in Lebanon and in Palestine and elsewhere. Is the Israeli regime getting anywhere near achieving such results? Over the past 2.5 years, more than 2.5 years now, the Israeli regime has succeeded in delegitimizing itself in the eyes of the world, creating contempt for it in the eyes of young Americans and increasingly the majority of Americans. exposing itself as the wrecker of the global economy as we speak. Things are not going well for the Israeli regime. The Mossad is doing a good job in destroying Israel. They can score victories in slaughtering little girls and boys in schools or at home, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran. But the Mossad, whatever its goals may be, is they and the other state institutions or regime institutions are destroying the Israeli regime. So, gone are the days when people would think that the Mossad is, all powerful. Remember, they used to say how fantastic Israeli Hasbara and propaganda is. Now, whenever you look at the stuff that they put out, you think that these people must be in order to be a part of their project, you have to have an IQ of below 70 or 80. It's so horrible. So their objectives are one thing, but the facts on the ground are something quite different. With regards to what the Russians have said, well, the Iranians have known that all along. But remember, after the 12-day war, the Israelis carried out a blitzkrieg attack with the Americans. As they were negotiating with Iran, they were conspiring to carry out an attack. And people thought Iran was fooled. That's not the case. The Iranians knew that there was probably going to be an attack. They didn't know what day or what hour, but negotiating doesn't mean that you've closed your eyes to everything else. Iran negotiates because it wants its own people to know that it's trying to prevent war, and it wants the international community to know that. And also, if Trump actually does need an off-ramp, maybe they can provide one for him without giving any real concessions. And that had a huge impact, because when the Israeli regime attacked Iran, they could not say, well, or the Americans, they could not say, well, if only the Iranians had negotiated. And Iran was negotiating, and they conspired to attack. And that went down poorly across the world. And then in this war, the same thing happened. Iran was negotiating as they were preparing to attack. The Omani foreign minister said great progress was made, but they still attacked. Iran was not foolish. And Iran knew that it was going to attack, but it wanted the world to see who is reasonable and who's not reasonable. And Iranians to see, because you don't want Iranians to say, well, maybe if you just negotiated, we could have stopped this. So when you negotiate, Iranians say, wow, these, those who support, I'm talking about those who are in the sort of gray area. There's always a percentage of people who are in the middle. You want them on your side. And so everyone says, look, these people are completely unreasonable, both inside Iran and outside. And right now, as we negotiate, and then during the 12th day, after the 12th, Iran got the upper hand by 5, 6 or so. And then it was the Israeli regime who was seeking a ceasefire, as Steve Bannon pointed out, by day 8 or so. Then after 12 days, Iran accepted the ceasefire or a halt in hostilities. People were saying, why did Iran do this? Are they crazy? No. Iran saw that despite the fact that they were winning, that they had significant deficiencies in how they had structured their defensive and offensive capabilities. And so they knew if the war continued, the United States would enter the battle. So Iran needed time to restructure its military and to make changes to its offensive and defensive capabilities, as well as its civilian assets to protect them. So when this war began, Iran had already emptied many bases and many buildings, and they had put in all sorts of decoys. So while they were bombing decoys and empty buildings, Iranians were firing, cheap drones and knocking out $1 billion radar installations, and of course doing what Iran was doing for 40 days. So Iran was buying time. Right now, with the ceasefire, Iran is doing the same thing. They're working 24 hours a day to prepare for the next phase. If there's a land offensive, the Iranians have to prepare for counter-striking territories where the Americans occupy. That's exactly what the Iranians have been planning from day one. In order to end U.S. hegemony and the threat of war, I'm sad to say, you have to have war. I mean, this aggressive empire has to be taught a lesson. The 40 days, the 12 days and the 40 days taught them some lessons, but that's not enough. The U.S., if it comes into Iran, the Iranians are waiting for them. And ignore the CNN and Fox News and the BBC and the Guardian and all that for a few days. They'll put out propaganda. But the Americans will lose. So Iran is preparing for war. Does Iran want war? No. Iran did not want any war. 3 wars have already been imposed on our country by the West. And in 1980, through Saddam Hussein, last year, and this war. But Iran is preparing for a 4th war. It didn't need like the Russian Security Council to make a statement to know that's happening. So while Iran is negotiating with the United States, as it has done on previous occasions, it is also preparing for the next phase. But remember, if there is a further war, that will mean that the ships in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. That means that the remaining assets of these Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And we'll be nearing summer, the hot season in the Persian Gulf very soon. If those assets on the other side of the Persian Gulf are destroyed, if that infrastructure is destroyed, people will have to leave immediately. It'll be too hot for people to remain there without electricity or water or anything like that. The regimes will all collapse. It will be over for them. Not something that Iran wants to do. But if they strike us, remember, they're all complicit. And if our infrastructure is struck, if they attack us, then we're going to retaliate.
For the record,
that will mean that a global economic depression worse than 1929 will be inevitable.
Yeah, I just want to say for the record that I do not at all ascribe to the view that the leaders of Iran or other resistance groups in the region are naive. I think they know better than anybody what they're dealing with when they're dealing with the U.S., the treachery, the perfidy. They've been killed. Their families have been killed by these people. The leaders of these resistance groups, the Iranian government, know perfectly well what they're dealing with. They don't need any help from us. And from my perspective, Professor Marandi, once Trump said that he was prepared to negotiate on the 10th.
Well, sorry, Dimitri, they do need help. Everyone across the world has a responsibility to rise up, to create awareness, to help with anti-war protests. The empire has to be brought down by everyone. Everyone has to be involved in their own way.
I completely agree. I was simply talking about, advising Iranians on the realities of the American government. That's all I was talking about.
Right.
I completely accept that we all, in fact, people living in the West have more of an obligation than anybody to rectify this catastrophe and these crimes, because it's being perpetrated by people who speak in our name and it's being funded with our taxes. So I completely agree with that sentiment. I was only talking about this notion that resistance leaders, Iranian government, are naive about the Americans and the Israelis. I think they know perfectly well what they're dealing with, and they don't need us to explain it to them. And I think that once Trump put on the table that he was going to accept, which I think was a lie, the 10-point peace plan, it would have been extremely unwise for the Iranian government to say, we're not going to sit down and talk with you, because when the global economy is plunged into a depression, there's going to be hell to pay. There are going to be a lot of angry people out there. And it's going to be very important for people to understand that the Iranian government made every effort to achieve a peace deal. It's not going to want to be isolated. So I completely understand why it did that.
So let me give you an example. And that's exactly the point. India under Modi has been very friendly to Netanyahu, sadly. Supporting this genocidal monster is beyond my comprehension. Why anyone would do that. Any sane person, any humane person would do that. But they have. Who is hurting the Indian economy as we speak? It is the Israelis. They've launched the war. Then they've tried to ruin the ceasefire. Then they tried to disrupt the negotiations. So while the global economic situation is getting worse, people in India are seeing who is causing them misery. So many in India and across the world, they hate Israel because of the genocide, but some others, for whatever reason, they don't see it that way. Now they are being harmed as individuals, as communities. And so who are they going to blame? Obviously, it's going to be those who are carrying out this situation, who are imposing this situation on the world. So when Trump says, I accept the Iranian framework, the Iranians are going to say, okay, let's sit down and talk. But that doesn't mean if we talk, we're going to suddenly be giving Trump all sorts of gifts. That means the negotiations begin. And when the United States refrained from imposing the ceasefire in Lebanon, the Iranians said, okay, well, then we're not going to allow those ships that we promised to go through the Strait of Hormuz to go through.
Yeah. Sitting down and talking with the Americans after Trump put out that post was a no-brainer. It was absolutely the right thing to do, even if there was a 90% chance that Trump was lying. So I want to conclude this because I know you have to go with this, the ultimate question, and we'll see where it all leads, and we all want to avoid a war. But frankly, Professor Marandi, I just don't believe for 1 second that they're not going to attack Iran again. I think that this is a virtual certainty. It's just a question of when and how they're going to do it. But everything that I see points to a further escalation because these people simply cannot, at this stage, I don't think that the American economy, the global economy, has suffered enough from their perspective that they feel the need to bring this to an end. And so I think they're going to come back for another round. I hope very much I'm wrong. Before you close it out, what is your view on all this? Do you think there's a realistic chance that they're going to come to their senses in the next few days, or do you think that that's highly unlikely?
I think that the chances for another round of war against Iran are high. Remember, we're dealing with two genocidal regimes. And Trump is a psychopath, and he's not normal. And Netanyahu he's the Hitler, the Saddam Hussein of our time, worse than them. He sees the slaughter in Lebanon as spiritual. And of course, this is reflective of the ideals of Epstein and the Epstein class, what they do to little girls and so on. Of course, they'll massacre little girls in Lebanon and in Gaza. That's who they are. They are the Epsteins of our world. But if they do engage in war, they will be defeated at great cost. The world economy is going downhill very fast. We are seeing the tip of the iceberg. And even if there is a solution today, which is highly unlikely, a lot of harm has been done. But the way things seem to be moving, it's going to get worse. And if there is war, it's going to a global economic depression is inevitable. So, but the world, Dimitri, the world has woken up. We're not living in the world of 3 years ago. People see across the world, people see Iran as the protagonist, the resistance as the protagonist. They see through all the propaganda, and they know who the antagonist is. And I've said this on a number of shows in the past couple of weeks. There's a very good book that I advise people to read, Going to Tehran by Clinton Hillary Mann Leverett. I advise you to read it too. They deal with a lot of the myths that have been made about Iran. And they were White House officials, both academics. They worked for Condoleezza Rice, and then Clint Leverett resigned over the Iraq War. But in any case, they say we have to move towards rapprochement. Everyone in the United States political class attacked them. And but if they had been listened to, instead of the political class obeying the Epstein class and the Zionists and the neocons, who are one and the same, we wouldn't be where we are today. We wouldn't be heading for global economic catastrophe. So these two people who wrote that book, they gave the United States the keys to escape this catastrophe. But the U.S. government chose to do the exact opposite.
Yeah. There has indeed been a sea change in world attitudes towards Iran and the West, and that's a wonderful thing, and we're going to do everything we can to continue to promote that sea change here on this channel. Thank you very much, Professor Marandi. Please stay safe out there.
Thank you. And I was glad seeing you in Tehran, and I hope to see you again.